Who needs more time? Okay. Can we start? So the petition of right, kind of apply, we said petition of right. Petition of right comes in the early 17th century when we had James and Charles, both of them trying to be these absolutist monarchs. And the English, of course, have this tradition of not permitting that kind of power. And in 1628, the Parliament is going to lay the petition of right on the king. The English Bill of Rights comes later in the century, after the English Civil War and after the Glorious Revolution, which is in 1680. And this comes, in fact, William and Mary coming into power in 1689. This is immediately given to them. This is like, you want to be king and queen, you're going to get this. This is our condition for actually recognizing you as the monarchs. So the English Bill of Rights is going to really usher in that that period after the Glorious Revolution, which finally brings an end to all of the problems that had come out of the English Civil War back in the 1640s. So let's take them in order, and we can treat them collectively after this. But let's start with the petition of right. What's in this that is familiar? Okay. Parliament retains the right to tax, not the king. Okay?
But the minor part of the document is like the Constitution.
Well, yeah, they refer to it as the English Charter of Liberties. What else?
You can't be forced to house a soldier.
soldiers can't, like, commit any murder, robbery, or felonies without being held responsible.
What do we want to call that?
They're held in the same standards as a civilian.
Actually, it turns out this time the king is still above the law, but no, they're working on it.
The death penalty?
No free person can be unlawfully taken and their possessions can't be destroyed without reason to.
I'll put protection of property with due process. What else? How about free speech?
I was gonna say, like, Parliament cannot be, like, during trials and impeachment, they're able to say, like, whatever they want to say.
I was thinking of the right to petition. It doesn't say free speech, but it says right to petition. Actually, there is only one document prior to the Constitution that actually says free speech or right to speech. Most of them use petition. Only one of them uses. The king is actually ordering that his troops, that the soldiers, are going to be staying in your house. And it turns out that happens at least 3 times that I know of. 3 times that I know because they show up in documents. They may have happened at other times as well. One of those times is in this period, and which is why it's showing up in the petition. Obviously, again during the revolution. What about bail?
Wasn't there the English bill of
Do you see anything about rights of people accused in here? You mentioned jury trials. I'll do it during the summary. Let's go to the English Bill of Rights and then we'll come back to it. Okay. What are we talking about here?
Right to bear arms.
I'm going to talk about this one. I want to talk about several. There's our context for this.
You can't take money unless it's granted to you by Parliament.
will come back to this. In this document, I believe it's still petition.
It says the freedom of speech on
Debates. Maybe I'm going to leave it here. It doesn't matter for our purposes because they're going to tie together.
Doesn't it say like commissioning a court for like purposes of like religious purposes?
That what's that?
It's like commissioning a court for like church like religious purposes?
Ecclesiastical.
Ecclesiastical.
Yeah. Church courts. Yeah, there won't be church courts. They're all like civil courts. Yeah.
You can't stop a law.
I'll leave that with this. Ordering the troops. When I get to the bottom, it gets hard to read. Quartering of troops. What about due process? These four, due process, no excessive bail, no cruel and unusual punishment, and freedom of petition speech. Those four show up in this document, in the Magna Carta. In fact, they show up in other documents as well, but of the ones that we're sampling, those four show up throughout. And so, the Magna Carta may have been only in force for 2 months. The fact remains that a bunch of people see it as their right. And they keep coming back to these things. Eventually we're going to see, well, very shortly we're going to be looking at colonial charters. There's a Massachusetts body of liberties, which is the most vast of all of the ones ever actually written down prior to the Constitution. But we go back to the 13th century, people are remembering 400 years later that they should have certain rights. And then there are contextual ones, things that like just came up. For instance, the Second Amendment originates with this conflict over the right of Protestants to be able to have access to weapons and defend themselves against Catholics. I mean, we never think of it that way now. It's actually only recent, in 2010, that the Supreme Court ruled that the right to bear arms is an individual right. And in this current session of the Supreme Court, they're supposed to hear a new case determining whether or not the right that an individual has to keep a weapon in their house actually extends to them taking it outside, that is, into public. It'll be really interesting to see what they say, because if that's true, everyone will be carrying guns all the time. No one can put any restrictions on anyone carrying guns wherever, whenever they want. The NRA will be very enthusiastic about that. But this, what's interesting about it, I was at a conference some years ago. It was in England. I've been at a number of conferences in England, but this particular one of the guys who was a panelist was a soldier. He was in the British military. He had been in British intelligence and he was kind of a James Bond type character. He was assigned to an office in Washington, D.C., and he was, during the Iraq War, he was collaborating with American intelligence officers. So there are all these military guys. And he thought it was very odd the way all of the American soldiers he was coming in contact with, like the amount of weight that they put in the Second Amendment. And if you ever want to have a really interesting conversation with someone from Great Britain, talk about the 4th of July. They're like, oh, that unfortunate holiday. This guy said, he says, you realize if it wasn't for the American Revolution, that all of you would have incredible health care and you wouldn't have a gun problem. That was his idea of the British Health Service. And what's interesting about this one is that, remember Lexington and Concord during the American Revolution? It's the first battle of the Revolution. Why did the battle happen? Huh?
The gunshot heard around the world.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, but what were they doing that this firing erupts?
Isn't it that the British were going to take the Americans' weapons?
So people didn't have their weapons. The weapons are stored in an arsenal in a local place, and therefore you have the right to own a weapon, but you keep it in this publicly guarded place. That's still, to this day, how they do it in Great Britain. You have a right to a weapon. It's a pretty thorough check they have to do on you, but you don't get to keep it in your house. It's kept in an arsenal, and then you can go check it out when you want to go use it, and then you have to bring it back. So the American Revolution begins with the British going to seize an arsenal where the Americans were actually keeping their guns. Okay, and that's where this it begins with this Protestant Catholic idea. The Catholics were controlling the arsenals. The Protestants don't have access to their weapons, so that's a problem. During the American Revolution, here the Americans trying to get access to their weapons, and the British are seizing the arsenal so that they can get it. Actually, they don't get there. The Americans get there first, and then it's off to the races, or at least off to the arsenal. Some of these things, like no standing army. Well, that's familiar. It's part of a debate. George Washington will actually go back on this issue all the time. It shows up in our Constitution rather indirectly. I will talk about it when we get to it. The Parliament, we'll see that, again, in the Constitution, is very specific about who gets to lay taxes. The President doesn't get to lay taxes. The President gets to collect the taxes. The President's not in charge of actually creating them. And then this issue of quartering of troops also shows up again in the Constitution, though it doesn't show up in every single document. The 4 that I circled there are ones that are consistent with what we've seen so far. It shows up in some form in all of the documents. New rights, other rights that people hadn't considered, will show up in later charters. It does raise the question, why did the English have these rights and they kept getting written down? There's nobody adhering to them, that they have to keep writing them down. Why should you have to keep writing out 12 times every time there's an issue that you have these rights? For the simple reason that the British don't have a written constitution, and if somebody's not adhering to it, or the king decides that he's going to, on a whim, take power for himself, who's to stop? There's one other thing. Who, in all of these cases, who seems to actually, where is the power supposed to end up? Well, indirectly to people. Who's getting it? Parliament. During the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the enemy is the king. Okay? And they will claim that King George is doing this and doing that. King George III did kind of have aspirations to show that he was powerful, and so he did do some things. The main problem for the colonists was it was the Parliament itself that, for them, started abusing its power. And the Parliament, throughout English history, had long been the defender of the people. So what happens when the defender of the people no longer seems to be defending the people? That's when things start having to, they have to turn to some other explanation for why it is they're doing what they're doing. Which takes me to, and I'm sorry to break up the class this way, where I kind of give you some reading, give you a short discussion, and then I give you more reading, but that's what I'm going to do, at least for today. So if you look at John Locke, chapter 2.
I don't like John Locke. He's wrong.
we've looked at Hobbes, but we have to look at his first major challenge. You'll note English Bill of Rights is 1689.
I have this book.
Locke publishes his second treatise on government in 1690. Okay? So he is reacting to the very same context of the English Bill of Rights. Locke is reacting, and he's just been witness to all of these events. And he's publishing his second treatise based on English just this month. I've used different chapters. This year we're using that too. And I want you to, now you'll notice that when you go to the link there, it's going to look long. That link also has chapter 7. Don't read chapter 7. Chapter 8. You almost done? We're going to want to compare Locke to Hobbes. And as soon as we get through, we have one more philosopher to do. As soon as we get through that, there will be a quiz. I just want to forewarn you. Because we have Locke, we have one more person who wants to see to cover, at which point we'll be getting the first answer. Do you need more time to unpack Locke? Okay. No, the quiz isn't today. How mean do you think I am? Jeez. Locke, we have one more philosopher to do yet. There'll be a quiz like, I don't know, Friday maybe? Depending on how we go. Wow, I can't imagine that.
Have you been taking notes?
Are you ready to talk about Locke? Or you need more time? Now you're ready. Okay. So, in this chapter, what is his focus? State of nature. What do we find out about the state of nature? Is it the same as what Hobbes has said? Yeah.
It says that everybody's equal. It doesn't matter what position you have.
Okay, Hobbes actually said something similar about in the state of nature everyone is equal, although then what happens next is next in position short.
Like, everyone's equal
Okay, so now remember I told you this, the state of nature aspect was something that was, Locke is using this as kind of a rhetorical device. People following him are going to do the same thing. They're going to say, oh, that's really interesting from a philosophical perspective. In philosophy, the way scientists will come up with an experiment in order to test out a hypothesis, in philosophy they do the same kind of thing. They're going to come up with a logic, some kind of like logic game in order to make the case. The state of nature allows them to do this.
Hobbes said that like kings are like people that God like chose to be the leader.
Yep.
But Locke said that monarchs are just like men and they are equal too.
There's no divine right as far as he's concerned. Yes.
Locke says that since everyone is equal and independent, you cannot harm anyone else, like unjustly.
He'll also take issue with this. I'm just going to say that. What else? One example. Others? Yes.
Hobbes talks about how there's just one absolute ruler that Locke knows that there are these ruler who appoints people to
Okay. Can you tell what Locke is trying to do here? Why is he making this argument? Can you tell why he might be going this direction? Okay, so where Hobbes says, look, you have to have the king. This is central to his argument. God determines who the king is. You have to have the king, otherwise everything is very, very bad. Locke says, no. That's not true at all. First, he's taking issue with the divine right. In order to take issue with the divine right, he's also going to have to take issue with the social contract. Because Hobbes says that social contract cannot be broken. In Locke's world, it's breakable. Now, this is implicit, okay? He doesn't come out and say, you should all go kill your kings. But this is an incredibly radical proposition for him to put forth. He's actually advocating that revolution is okay when the king has not been holding up his card. But remember, Hobbes' position was the reason you had to have this is because of this. Why does Locke think, this is the important part, and I won't answer today, I'll make it our conversation next time I see you. Why does Locke think that this system, that your right to revolution, after the English Civil War didn't work out so well, why does he think it will work? Now, I don't think the answer is actually in that chapter. I think it's elsewhere. But give some thought to why you think he might be able to make the argument. Something has to be essential that people will actually recognize is something that bonds them together so that they can actually recognize the self-government. Okay? There has to be something there. And I would also, now this is incredibly hard to do, but I would suggest that some of the answers you've given me for those other charters, you would actually find the answer there. Think about it. maybe you'll have an answer, but that's where we'll start next class, okay? And then we'll work through Montesquieu, and then we'll be able to, then we're going to start talking about the colonies, and we're going to start talking about their charters and their conditions.